Alright, in this video I will talk about some of the maintenance of having a Dutch bucket system like I have in the greenhouse. And mainly we're gonna talk about tomatoes and cucumbers because that is what I'm growing right now. But if you think that it's so much maintenance, it must be so much maintenance, right? I don't think so. Compared to normal tomato growing, it's kind of the same. You just do little different things. I think it's probably less maintenance, honestly, like for what you get, absolutely. But we're gonna talk about that. So first of all, let's talk about the plant specific things, for tomatoes and cucumbers, and not really hydroponic specific. And that is just tying up the tomatoes and cucumbers and taking the suckers, because I have a single leader on every plant. I don't want to do the double leader stuff because it will get too cramped in here. I can't do that really. I have too little space, and also too little vertical space, which we're gonna talk about. But as you saw in my last video, which you can check out after this one, I use tomato hooks, or plant hooks for the plants, and they work really well at just keeping everything nice and tidy while you really see what you're doing and you have good airflow. Yeah, it's honestly perfect. And in a system like that, you can have multiple leaders, but then you need more tomato hooks. You need 2 hooks per plant if you want to have 2, stems going like this or something. But this works very well because my greenhouse is not very tall, so I am moving the plants further down the row, and they are moving in like a spiral. So what happens is that, as you can see in the background, the tomato stem is growing very diagonally, and that is because it reached the roof, and then I'm moving it further down so it can continue to grow horizontally, or lengthwise. And when I'm doing this, and when you're just having indeterminate tomatoes and cucumbers in general, you want to take all the suckers off. I just think that is the easiest way to grow tomatoes. I haven't tried doing multiple leaders, but I have also tried not taking suckers off at all, and it just becomes kind of a mess, and they don't really have time to develop into fruit. But right now I'm seeing a lot of fruit, and soon they're ripening. I mean, I have some ripe right now and I harvested yesterday, but I think the biggest harvests are they're soon coming. And also, I just came to think about something, a little problem that I have. And that is that because my greenhouse is not very tall, then the cucumbers and tomatoes, they reach the top pretty fast. And what happens is that when you move the tomatoes further down the row, then the bottom tomatoes will go lower down. And what happens is that they start touching the ground, which is not good at all. We don't want to have tomatoes touching the ground because it will much easily be infected and by pests and stuff like that, which we don't want. And what speeds up this process is that the cucumbers grow so fast, and the cucumbers are basically faster than the tomatoes. So then I need to move like every plant down just because one cucumber has reached the top, which is not very good. I could just top the plant and let a side shoot grow up to stunt the growth, but I also don't want to stunt the growth of my cucumbers. Maybe I could just move the cucumbers to another place. I can just take the hooks off basically, so I can just move them, or hopefully it will just work. So we're gonna see. But I've gotten some great cucumbers, not as big as last year, but it was another variety, so it's probably because of the variety. But anyway, let's get into the Dutch bucket system specific things. Now the first thing, of course, is filling up the reservoir. You just need to keep those nutrients and the water topped up. You don't want the pump running dry too much, or you don't want that at all. Now my reservoir is very small, it's probably like 30-40 liters, so I have to top it up pretty often. But I have another tank that is 70 liters that I use to fill the smaller one. So then I have 2 fills, so I can top it up 2 times before having to put more nutrient solution in. And by the way, I have started using Master Blend, calcium nitrate and magnesium sulfate. And it works very good actually, but it's a little expensive. But also compared to using General Hydroponics or Terra Aquatica, 3-part, that is also very expensive. That's more expensive. This is less expensive, so I mean that's what I wanted. And it's made for tomatoes. It's the tomato formula, so it works very good for the tomatoes, and the cucumbers seem to be doing just fine, so that's great. But yeah, so topping out the reservoir is basically the only thing you need to do. And if you build your system well, then you shouldn't have to do anything else than that once the season is growing. But you know, in the beginning of the season I used a water heater, which then turned out to electrocute the plant for some reason, so I had to remove it, and that can be some maintenance, you know. And you should also clean the reservoir, which is something I haven't done, and also clean the filter in the reservoir. I haven't done that as well. And there's a lot of algae, you know, the reservoir doesn't become very clean. You know, I got some snails last year, which is not very fun, and I've also sadly got some of the nutrients that are falling out of the water, or whatever you call it, you know. It becomes this, you know, the magnesium sulfate and the calcium nitrate, it like forms some weird thing that, you know, you build houses with that stuff, but you don't want it in your reservoir. So you just have to clean that. But if you pour the nutrients well, then that shouldn't be a problem. So you shouldn't have to do that once it's going. Now, 2 other things that have happened is that sometimes, not during the season, it was in the beginning of the season, what happened was that the leca got stuck in the, you know, outflow of the buckets, and then it clogged up the water, so that the water just kept being in the buckets, and then it just lifted up the leca and it fell out. So that was not very fun. Now that is completely because of my bad engineering or my bad designing, because I didn't use the standard, you know, 2 elbows like they do in the commercial systems. I just used a tap, and then I made some small filter kind of made out of metal wires, which didn't really work very good. So that is not very nice, but you know, it just happened 2 times in the same bucket, and the rest of the buckets were fine, so it's not a giant problem. And the other thing that happens sometimes is that the emitters, they go out of the buckets, and then the reservoir will just drain, which is not very nice. But I have a small reservoir, so that's a good thing about having a smaller reservoir. So in case anything fails, like the emitters pop out, then I won't have like 200 liters of water in my greenhouse, but more like 30 liters, which is fine. And also because I have a pump that is moving pretty fast, it's not a drip system, you know, then the water will be released pretty fast into the ground if the emitters pop up. But you can just solve that using like a fastener or something. I just haven't gotten to it because it just works. You know, it shouldn't really be a problem. I just put the pipe in the ground and that works, or in the leca. But that is basically everything you need to do. So that is it for this video. So I hope that you learned something. I hope that I can inspire you to build a Dutch bucket system like this. I really recommend it because we are seeing some very good harvests. And I will see you soon. So goodbye.